The message found Sarah precisely when she needed it most. 3 hours into another sleepless night, scrolling mindlessly on her phone to quiet the persistent feeling that had been growing within her for months. A feeling that something enormous was about to happen. She nearly scrolled past it. This video, with its dramatic title about chosen ones and divine purpose. Normally, she would have dismissed it as spiritual clickbait. But tonight, her finger hesitated over the screen. A tingling sensation traveled up her arm, and before she could rationalize it away, she pressed play. Chosen one, this message has reached you at the perfect time. It is not by chance that you are here. The voice was unremarkable, but the words seemed to bypass her ears and speak directly to her soul. Sarah sat up in bed, suddenly alert, as if waking from a dream within a dream. The 144,000 chosen ones are being called into alignment in the spiritual realm. And if you are here, it means you are part of this grand awakening. A chill ran through her body. She had been feeling it, that stirring deep within, the unshakable sense that something was shifting in the unseen world. The unexplained number sequences that followed her everywhere. 111, 444, 777. The dreams so vivid, they lingered like memories. The growing awareness that she perceived reality differently than others around her. She listened to the entire message, transfixed, as it spoke of prophecies, spiritual wars, and a divine gathering of souls meant to transform the world. When it ended, Sarah sat in the stillness of her bedroom, her mind unusually quiet. "This is absurd," she whispered to herself. "Just another spiritual guru trying to build a following." But even as she formed the words, she knew they were hollow. Something within her had recognized a truth in that message. A truth she had always known, but had never been able to articulate. Sarah got out of bed and walked to her window. The city slept under a blanket of artificial light, but above it, the stars punctured the darkness with ancient fire. Tonight, they seemed closer, more vibrant, as if straining to communicate something urgent. "Is this real?" she asked the empty room. "Am I truly one of these chosen ones?" No voice answered, but deep within her consciousness, something unfurled like a flower opening to the sun. It wasn't a voice, but a knowing, absolute and unquestionable. Yes, you have always known. That's why nothing has ever felt quite right. Sarah's life flashed before her eyes. The persistent feeling of being different, of seeing through the facades that others accepted as reality, the inexplicable knowledge she sometimes possessed, the dreams that felt like memories of places she had never been. She had spent years trying to fit in, to convince herself that these experiences were just peculiarities of an overactive imagination. She had suppressed her intuition, ignored the signs, medicated the visions away. But now, standing by her window, with the stars as witnesses, Sarah allowed herself to consider a possibility that both terrified and exhilarated her. What if it was all real? What if she was Mas, if in response to her question, a shooting star streaked across the sky, leaving a trail of light that burned itself into her retinas? Sarah made her decision. She would no longer hide from her truth. Whatever this awakening was, she would face it head on. Little did she know, across the world, thousands of others were experiencing the same revelation. Some through the same message, others through dreams, visions, or an unexplainable knowing that had descended upon them like a mantle. The gathering of the 144,000 had begun. Dr. Michael Chen, closed his laptop with a gentle click and removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. As a quantum physicist specializing in consciousness studies, he had dedicated his career to understanding the intersection of science and what some might call the spiritual. Yet tonight, he felt like a novice again, confronted by a phenomenon that defied his understanding. For weeks, his research team had been detecting unusual patterns in their consciousness field measurements, synchronized spikes that couldn't be explained by any known environmental factors. It was as if thousands of minds across the planet were simultaneously entering heightened states of awareness. And now this, a viral message spreading across the internet about 144,000 chosen ones awakening to their divine purpose. The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. Michael had always been careful to maintain scientific objectivity, to avoid the New Age mysticism that often attached itself to his field. But he couldn't ignore the correlation, nor could he dismiss the strange experiences he himself had been having recently, and for something greater. The dreams of ancient symbols, the sudden insights into problems he'd been working on for years, the sensation of being guided by an intelligence beyond his own. "Are you going home tonight, Doctor?" Chen, his assistant, Ravi, stood in the doorway, coat already on. "Soon," Michael replied, not mentioning that home had begun to feel like the wrong word. Lately, nowhere felt like home, as if he were remembering a place he had never been to in this life. After Ravi left, Michael opened his desk drawer and took out his journal. For months, he had been recording his experiences, a scientist documenting the inexplicable shift in his own consciousness. He flipped to a drawing he had sketched after a particularly vivid dream, concentric circles with intricate patterns between them, symbols in a language he didn't recognize, yet understood on some fundamental level. He had searched for similar patterns in ancient texts, and to his astonishment, found them in Sumerian tablets, Egyptian hieroglyphs, and obscure mystical writings spanning cultures and centuries. His phone buzzed with a notification. Another article about unprecedented auroras appearing simultaneously around the world, even in regions where such phenomena were impossible according to current scientific understanding. Michael looked back at his journal, then at the darkened lab equipment still recording data, still capturing the crescendo of human consciousness that was building toward... What? Something's coming, he whispered to the empty lab. And we're all part of it. Amara sat cross-legged on the floor of her modest apartment in Lagos, her body perfectly still, while her mind expanded beyond the confines of physical existence. Since childhood, she had possessed gifts that her grandmother had taught her to hide. The ability to see auras, to heal with her hands, to know things about people they had never spoken aloud. For years, she had used these gifts quietly, becoming a respected healer in her community without drawing too much attention to the true nature of her abilities. But recently, something had changed. Her powers had intensified, and with them came visions of a gathering storm, not of destruction, but of transformation. Tonight, the visions were clearer than ever. She saw threads of light connecting individuals across the planet, a vast network of awakened souls pulsing with the same divine frequency. In her vision, these threads were converging, strengthening, creating a luminous web that enveloped the earth. As she watched, the web began to glow brighter, and Amara understood. This was the unification that had been prophesied. The chosen ones were connecting, their collective energy creating a force powerful enough to shift the very fabric of reality. Amara opened her eyes, her heart racing with the significance of what she had witnessed. This was why her gifts had been growing stronger. This was why she had been feeling pulled toward a greater purpose. She rose and walked to the small altar she maintained in the corner of her room. Upon it sat objects of power passed down through generations of her family's lineage: a carved wooden figurine, crystalline stones, a bowl of clear water that she used for scrying. Amara placed her hands over the water and whispered words in a language older than her ancestors. The surface rippled without her touching it, and images formed. Faces of strangers connected by the same divine purpose, locations where energy vortexes were forming, symbols that contained codes of awakening. She recognized her role now. She was a keeper of ancient wisdom, tasked with helping others understand the transformation they were experiencing. The 144,000 would need guides, anchors to help them navigate the expansion of consciousness that was occurring. Amara reached for her phone. It was time to connect with the others she had seen in her visions: the scientist in Hong Kong, the writer in New York, the teacher in Peru. Together, they would help shepherd this global awakening, ensuring that the chosen ones found their way through the disorientation and into their power. As she began typing a message, a wave of energy washed over her so powerfully that she gasped. It radiated from somewhere beyond the physical realm, a pulse of divine light that touched every cell in her body. The unification had begun, and there was no turning back. In the heart of Manhattan, Gabriel Martinez stepped out of the corporate tower where he'd spent 15 years climbing to the position of senior investment banker. The resignation letter he'd just handed his shocked CEO felt like the first authentic action he'd taken in decades. For months, Gabriel had been fighting against a growing sense that his life, successful by every external measure, was a carefully constructed illusion. The money, the prestige, the luxury apartment overlooking Central Park, none of it filled the void that had been expanding within him. Then came the dreams, vivid and relentless, showing him a world beyond the material, reminding him of a purpose he had agreed to before birth. Each morning, he would wake with phrases echoing in his mind: divine mission, spiritual warrior, awakening. At first, he had scheduled appointments with specialists, convinced he was experiencing early signs of a mental breakdown. The doctors found nothing wrong. Physically, he was in perfect health. One therapist suggested meditation for stress, and Gabriel had reluctantly tried it. That first meditation had broken something open inside him. Sitting in silence, he had felt an energy rise from the base of his spine, traveling upward until it exploded into light behind his closed eyelids. In that moment, Gabriel remembered, not with his mind, but with his soul. He remembered who he was beyond this human experience. He remembered the agreement he had made to be here at this precise moment in history. He remembered his role among the 144,000. Now, walking away from the life he had built, Gabriel felt lighter than he had in years. The resignation was just the beginning. He had already liquidated most of his assets, keeping only what he needed for the next phase of his journey. His phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. The gathering begins tonight. Spiritual realm. Be prepared. Gabriel smiled. Once, such a cryptic message would have seemed absurd. Now, it felt like receiving directions home after a long journey in foreign lands. He looked up at the towering skyscrapers, monuments to humanity's material pursuits. Soon, many would understand what he now knew, that this physical reality was just one dimension of existence, that something far greater awaited those who had the courage to awaken. Tonight, Gabriel would join the others in spirit. The unification would strengthen them all for what was to come. The spiritual war had been raging unseen for millennia, but the tides were turning. The light was rising, and Gabriel was ready to stand in its service. Sarah sat on her balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. After discovering the message about the chosen ones 3 nights ago, her life had transformed with dizzying speed. She had spent the first day researching, diving deep into ancient prophecies, quantum physics theories about consciousness, and accounts of spiritual awakenings throughout history. What she found both validated her experiences and expanded her understanding of what was happening globally. The second day, she had begun to connect with others who shared her awakening. Through online forums, synchronistic encounters, and what could only be described as telepathic recognition, Sarah found herself part of a growing network of individuals who were experiencing the same shift in consciousness. Today, she had taken a leave of absence from her job as a graphic designer. Her boss had been surprisingly understanding, as if some part of him recognized the importance of what she was undertaking, even if his conscious mind couldn't comprehend it. Now, as dusk settled over the city, Sarah prepared for the spiritual gathering that would take place that night. She had cleared her apartment of clutter, bathed in water infused with salt and herbs, and created a sacred space where she could meditate without distraction. Her phone pinged with messages from others who were preparing for the same event: a physicist in Hong Kong, a healer in Nigeria, a former banker in New York. Though they had never met in person, Sarah felt a profound connection to them, as if they were parts of the same cosmic being, separated only by the illusion of physical form. Are you ready for tonight? The message came from Michael, the quantum physicist whose research had been inadvertently tracking the awakening. "As ready as I can be," Sarah replied, "though I'm not entirely sure what to expect." None of us are. This goes beyond what science can predict or spirituality has described. We're in uncharted territory. Sarah set her phone aside and closed her eyes, focusing on her breath. The energy within her had been building all day, a vibration that seemed to resonate with some cosmic frequency beyond human perception. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Sarah felt a presence envelop her. Not threatening, but immense and ancient. It seemed to evaluate her, to recognize her, and then to welcome her as one would welcome a long-lost child. "It is time," a voice spoke within her mind. "The gathering begins." Sarah opened her eyes, but her physical surroundings had faded. She found herself in a vast, luminous space where time and distance held no meaning. Around her, countless others were appearing, some as distinct forms, others as patterns of light and energy. She recognized Michael, his scientific mind translating the experience into structures he could comprehend. She saw Amara, the Nigerian healer, moving through this space with the confidence of one returning to a familiar home. Gabriel, the former banker, stood like a sentinel, his energy protective and strong. And there were thousands of others, of all ages, backgrounds, and cultures. Some seemed bewildered, others ecstatic, but all were connected by the same divine purpose that had brought them to this moment. As more arrived, the energy intensified. Sarah felt knowledge downloading directly into her consciousness, wisdom that was not learned but remembered, codes activating dormant aspects of her DNA, insights into the true nature of reality and her role in reshaping it. In this spiritual gathering, there was no hierarchy, no leader directing others. Each of the 144,000 was receiving exactly what they needed for their unique mission, their individual piece of the greater divine plan. Sarah understood now why they had been called the Chosen Ones. It wasn't about superiority or special favor, but about souls who had volunteered for this mission long before they took human form. Souls strong enough to forget their divine nature and then remember it at precisely the right moment. The gathering reached a crescendo as all 144,000 synchronized their energy, creating a force of such profound love and spiritual power that it sent ripples through every dimension of existence. In that moment of perfect unity, each participant received a clear vision of what would follow this awakening. Not an apocalypse of destruction, but a transformation of consciousness that would ultimately heal a world long suffering under the weight of fear, separation, and spiritual amnesia. Then, gradually, Sarah became aware of her physical form again, the solid chair beneath her, the cool night air on her skin. She opened her eyes to see the stars shining with newfound brilliance, as if they too had been transformed by what had just occurred. Her phone was filled with messages from the others. Did you feel that? Everything has changed. We are connected now, unbreakable. The real work begins tomorrow. Sarah typed her own response, her fingers trembling, not with fear, but with the immensity of what she had experienced. We are awake, and we are not alone. The months following the spiritual gathering brought changes both subtle and profound. The 144,000 awakened ones found themselves navigating a world that continued its familiar patterns, while they themselves had been fundamentally transformed. Michael Chen's research took a revolutionary turn as he developed new methods to measure and document the shifts in global consciousness. His papers, once confined to obscure academic journals, were now being discussed in mainstream scientific communities, opening doorways between science and spirituality that had long been closed. Amara established a center for spiritual awakening in Lagos that quickly became a beacon for those experiencing their own shifts in consciousness. Here, ancient wisdom and modern understanding merged to create a new paradigm for human potential. Gabriel used his financial expertise and resources to create a foundation supporting initiatives aligned with the awakening, sustainable communities, consciousness research, healing centers, and technologies developed with awareness of their spiritual impact. And Sarah discovered her own role as a bridge between the awakened ones and those still sleeping. Her gift for communication allowed her to translate complex spiritual concepts into language that resonated with people at all stages of awareness. Together with thousands of others across the planet, they worked not to convert or convince, but to hold space for humanity's natural evolution toward greater consciousness. The spiritual war continued, with forces of fear and control fighting to maintain their grip on human perception. But with each passing day, more people began questioning the systems and beliefs that had kept them limited. More began seeing through the illusions that had been presented as reality. More began remembering their own divine nature. It wasn't always easy. The awakened ones faced resistance, ridicule, and sometimes danger. Their own human doubts and fears occasionally threatened to derail them. But the connection forged during that night of unification remained unbroken, a web of light that sustained them through every challenge. 1 year after the gathering, Sarah sat on the same balcony where she had experienced the unification. The world appeared largely unchanged. People still rushed to work. Buildings still rose toward the sky. The news still reported the same cycles of crisis and distraction. Yet beneath this surface continuity, something fundamental had shifted. The awakening was happening not with dramatic apocalyptic events, but through millions of individual moments of realization. Small choices aligned with greater consciousness, quiet recognitions of truth. Sarah closed her eyes and extended her awareness, feeling the network of awakened souls now spanning the planet. Some were among the original 144,000, while others had been activated by their presence, creating ripples of awakening that continued to expand. The prophecy had never been about a select few ascending while others remained behind. The chosen ones were simply the first wave, seeds planted in the collective consciousness of humanity to catalyze a greater blooming. Sarah smiled as she felt new lights awakening across the world. A teenager in Brazil, suddenly questioning the nature of reality. A grandmother in Japan, remembering ancient wisdom while tending her garden. A prisoner discovering inner freedom in the confines of his cell. The message that had found her a year ago had spoken of endings and beginnings, of spiritual warfare and cosmic significance. All of that was true, but the reality was both simpler and more profound than words could capture. This awakening wasn't the end of a world, but the birth of a new understanding, that humanity had never been separate from the divine, that the veil between dimensions was created by perception alone, that love was not just an emotion, but the fundamental fabric of existence. As the sun set over the city, Sarah whispered a prayer of gratitude for the journey that had brought her here, and for the path that continued to unfold before her. The 144,000 had united. The light was rising, and though the full transformation might take generations, its completion was already written in the stars. The chosen ones had remembered who they were, and in their remembering, they held space for all of humanity to remember too. This was their purpose. This was the Great Awakening, and it had only just begun.